Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here, back again with your daily dose of doom and gloom, and hopefully once all the dust settles on all of this madness, bloom. It's not just doom and gloom, it's also about bloom. That is the end goal with preparedness, but there still is a long way to fall because we are unfortunately in the age of consequences. Now, I've been very busy in the last 72 hours working on a variety of other projects, which is why I haven't released any daily update videos like this, but a lot has been going on. We've been working on things of a more applied preparedness nature, if you will. Things such as, and not limited to, firearms training, procurement, because of course we're about to be completely neutered by the Canadian government in that respect. We're talking about testing out body armor, camping gear, winter camping gear, doing some ice fishing, going out and doing some collaborations with Arcopia and their passive solar greenhouse that they finally completed. Also doing other collaborations with channels like The Container Guy, where he's going to give us some insight about the world of shipping containers, because we know how much that preppers like shipping containers, and we want to know what we can and can't actually do with a shipping container, and many other channels and videos, guys. We've just been working on a lot of stuff, so no, you know us, never resting on our laurels until the shizzy hits the fizzy. Maybe then, maybe on that one day, when it actually all goes down, maybe that's when I'll take a day off. But until then, we got to keep working and we got to maximize what we can while the getting is good. Now, let's talk about the headlines today. 99% chance of recession due to what economists refer to as the inverted yield curve. We're going to talk about these things in greater depth in just a minute. We have Russia preparing 500,000 men to enter Ukraine for a major winter war, which could possibly escalate to a World War III, even though many people, depending on the semantics you use, think that we're already in World War III grand winter offensive. Ukraine was, up until yesterday, in total blackout from space. Seeing the satellite images of that was pretty staggering. We have distributor pricing that just came in from Mountain House, and this is a Canadian Prepper exclusive story that made my jaw nearly hit the floor. I cannot believe the price of freeze-dried food compared to what it was just 3 years ago. I got my pricing for 2023, and all I can say is that if you want to get freeze-dried food, lock it in. If you can, lock it in today. Actually, we still have our Black Friday sale going at CanadianPreparedness.com until midnight. Tonight, you can save up to 13% off. And the reason why it's just a paltry 13% is because we don't bullshit like a lot of stores and jack up the price and then say, oh, you're going to save 70%. No, straight up 13% across the board. Everything in the store except Harvest Right freeze dryers, because those things are so expensive to ship. Anyways, we have record COVID infections in China. 412 million people still under lockdown after 3 years. And you know what their record infections are? I think it's like 30,000 people, okay? 30,000. There were times during the pandemic in the United States where I believe on a daily basis, we were like 4 or 5 times that amount just for infections on a daily basis. So yeah, there's a long way to go down, and that's going to have drastic economic repercussions for us all. They're building these massive COVID detention camps, some of them 250,000 strong. These things are massive. Okay, and of course, it's creating a little bit of unrest there. Nothing that's going to get too out of control, but a little bit of unrest, to say the least. Bird flu has exploded to staggering levels. Very, very unsettling stuff is happening on the bird flu front. As I said, Russia is, I may not have said this yet, but Russia is, I talk about Russia so much that I never know what I've talked about yet, but 500,000 troops are ready and rearing to go on the border as they prepare to enter Ukraine for the major winter war offensive, the major winter World War III offensive, as it appears as though NATO is being pulled more directly into a direct confrontation with the Russians this winter. We have Canadians, of course, who are going to be completely disarmed of their firearms in the not so distant future. And there's a complete paucity of concern amongst most Canadian firearms owners who just don't really seem to care that much. Unfortunately, it appears as though it's going to go through, but we're going to do our best to exploit the legal and political channels that are there in order to fight this thing. Because what else can we do? I mean, it's getting to the point where I seriously want to leave the country, guys. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about that later. We have the Russian oil price cap that is coming, and that's going to have repercussions on the energy market around the world. So enjoy these relatively low gas prices while they last. We have the Holodomor, which we'll talk about, the anniversary of the Holodomor, talk about what that was, what it means, and some prepping lessons that we can learn from it. Now, getting back to the distributor pricing on Mountain House food. We're talking about distributor pricing. Okay, get this, guys. $50 for a number 10 can. That's Canadian dollars, which works out to about $40 more or less American. $40 wholesale pricing on Mountain House. Now, when you factor in the shipping, the packaging, the getting it shipped here, I mean, you got to sell something like that at least $75 to make a profit, not counting paying all your employees and all that stuff. So it's getting to the point where until people have gotten accustomed, it's not going to be long before you're seeing a number 10 can of high quality Mountain House food, which is what it is, hitting $100. And, by that time, perhaps minimum wage is going to be way higher, and there's going to be this, inflationary wave that elevates all ships. But I don't know, man, the price of food is fitting to skyrocket because, of course, the rising energy costs, the scarcity of fertilizer as a result of this war, which is going to only really be getting started next year by the sounds of things, as well as just a variety of other factors which are creating the perfect storm for rising food prices next year. They're talking now about a 99% chance of recession, as if we needed to know that. We're already in a recession by some people's standards. A stagflationary style depression is coming. But the yield curve has inverted, and that means that the 2-year bond is yielding 4.45% compared to the 10-year bonds 3.78%. The inversion signals that investors see more risk in the short term given the weakening economic conditions, and that's if everything remains relatively stable. But because of this situation right now in China with 412 million people under lockdown, it's looking as though workflow and the supply chains could potentially be further compromised. And that's if this socioeconomic instability doesn't start to escalate into something more. Now, I don't think it will. Every time something happens in China, all of the doomsayers come on and say, oh, China's on the brink of collapse. China's not on the brink of collapse in the same way that America didn't collapse after the George Floyd protests, not even remotely close, okay? And I don't even think that these protests that are taking place in China right now are even on the same scale as that, not even close. So no, the Chinese government is not going to collapse, but this will mean that if they continue to pursue this zero COVID policy, that this could potentially go on for years and years. And we have one positive input coming from the Taiwan election, in which, and this, it's positive depending on how you look at it. Some people think it's inconsequential, but essentially the current Taiwanese government lost in their localized elections. So the presidential election is still in 2024, but the president stepped down. And people are taking this as a sign that people have voted in favor of peace and reunification with China. However, it's a nationalist party who is still perhaps a little bit more sympathetic to the Chinese cause, but this does not mean that they want to reunify. So this is likely going to have little to no effect on foreign relations between Taiwan and China. So it's likely as though, we're going to continue to see the escalation of the war drums in the South China Sea, and that this is mostly, this change of government that Taiwan's seen on a local level was mostly related to domestic issues, and more, it's more of an indicator, they're saying, that people are desensitized to the China threat there and that they don't take it seriously. So that's not good either, right? But this could potentially lead to supply chain issues. And, these lockdowns are just going to continue. They're talking about iPhone production being down like 30% next year. I know that's not a big thing for us preppers, but it's just another sign that that is going to put further pressure on the downward nature of our economy. Now, something interesting, apparently the Chinese still don't use mRNA vaccines. Apparently they have one that's going to be in the works, but in all these years, they've avoided them, citing safety concerns. That's interesting to me. Just a little useless factoid for your consideration. China has the capability to develop these things. In fact, based on what I've heard, the actual development of the mRNA technology, like finding a vaccine for this current pandemic, only took like a couple days to make. It was all the testing and stuff that took so long. So the countries, especially in the Wuhan lab, where you have a level 5 lab where they're testing this kind of thing, obviously they have the ability to make these, but for some reason they've been reluctant to do so, and instead they're willing to completely shoot themselves in the foot economically at a huge expense, at a huge loss, billions and billions, probably hundreds of billions of dollars lost. Probably even more than, probably in the trillions now in terms of the money that they've lost taking this approach. But they're doing it anyways for some reason. Some people think it's all about control and getting their population under lockdown so that they comply when ultimately we do go to war with the Chinese. Other people think it's just Chinese pride, not wanting to, be perceived as making an error on their handling of the pandemic. And other people, more conspiratorial minded, might say, well, they know something we don't about the virus. Anyways, on the topic of viruses, 50 million dead birds in the USA due to bird flu. And the experts are saying we're just one mutation or recombination away from total hell being unleashed. A recombination is when one virus infects a species and then another virus infects it, and then those two viruses kind of intertwine somehow. I don't know all the details of it, but there is that potential, and we are but one mutation away. Now, I've been looking at a lot of stuff with respect to this issue because we want to release a more detailed mini documentary of sorts about the potential risk and whether or not this is something we should be focused on. Surprisingly, in spite of the prevalence of bird flu, the amount of human infections is down substantially, and that's largely due, I think, I can just make this induction, that in 2015, 30% of the cases were in wild birds, whereas now it's 80%. So while the number of bird flu infections has increased, it's more so in the wild population. And that's actually where you don't want it, because that's where it can mutate, and that's where animals can interact. And this has a huge R value. You remember that R value they were talking about with COVID? They said it was, I think at its highest, was maybe 3 or 4 people infected per one person. So every one person who had the virus would infect up to 3 or 4 people. I'm just throwing numbers out there. Obviously, it varied a lot throughout the thing. And according to this information here, that the R value for bird flu, avian flu, can be as high as 100, meaning one bird can infect as many as 100 others. Now, are these statistics based on the fact that oftentimes if you have one chicken in a very crowded chicken farm, in one of those factory farms where they're just surrounded, is that what they're basing these R values on? Because obviously, one chicken in one of those confined environments where everything is tightly controlled, one little minute speck of pestilence thrown in there can just spread like wildfire through the whole place. And this is why I used to dread the bird flu so much, because it just seemed like a matter of time before these controlled and very sterile factory farm conditions that we created like a super virus that just took out everything. Fortunately, one of the benefits of the factory farming, even though you're making these chickens which are highly susceptible to this stuff, it's still very controlled. So that means you can control what comes in and what comes out. However, the big concern, of course, is that this could potentially jump to humans. Now, as far as I know, there was a moratorium on gain-of-function research with avian influenza testing, and they do gain a function in order to make viruses for treating viruses if they ever become a pandemic. So the same thing that went on with coronavirus testing, they wanted to see if they could soup up this virus and make an antidote for it should it arise. And, by some people's standards, maybe that backfired. But anyways, apparently that moratorium was lifted in 2019. And so they restarted bird flu gain-of-function research. But I don't know. I haven't done enough research into whether or not they're still doing this kind of testing right now. It seems pretty insane if they are at this point. If they're making a virus, an avian flu virus that I should add has a 60% fatality rate in humans and an R value of 100, I mean, that's a super virus. That's a planet-killing virus. Okay, that's a civilization-ending virus. The only upside is that typically with viruses that kill at those high levels, they have shorter incubation periods, meaning that they're easier to contain and easier to detect. But R value of 100, I mean, if that's replicated in the human population, even an R value of 2 would be pretty crazy. So yeah, let's hope that doesn't go anywhere. But I'm guessing that bird flu is going to be a big problem moving forward, not just for food prices. I mean, we're talking about turkey. They're calling turkey shrinkflation this year, and that the turkeys are actually smaller. And the cost of eggs and chicken is skyrocketing and is likely only going to get worse. And part of the reason with bird flu is that it's becoming more prevalent even in the summer months, when in the past, usually the numbers go down to almost nothing. This year, that wasn't the case, okay, which means that it's going to be even worse this winter. And on the topic of viruses, more good news. Scientists have decided to revive a 48,000-year-old virus that emerged from melting permafrost. Yes, all of this permafrost that's melting all around the world with these record temperatures. And the guys in China right now, China is baking right now in record high temperatures, unseasonably high temperatures, whereas places like Texas are anomalously cold. Whereas here, we've had record temperatures all week in the plus range, like +1, +5. And next week, it's going to go down to -20, -30. So it's just crazy, wild weather swings. Anyways, fortunately, the virus that they revived only infects single-celled organisms. So we dodged a bullet this time. But this is proof of concept, if you will, that old viruses can be resurrected, and these viable spores of bacteria or viruses could reemerge and just create some super virus. They're conveniently calling them zombie viruses. Okay? Now, on to the war front. North Korea aspires to have the most powerful nuclear arsenal in the world. And it should be known that based on their most recent tests of their intercontinental ballistic delivery system, they can already target Washington with a weapon that we would not be able to intercept. So, hopefully that helps you sleep more at night. But hopefully it motivates you to prep more. Now, most people probably came here for my thoughts on World War III, Russia, Ukraine. Things have been relatively calm there recently, and that is because it's the muddy season. And there isn't a lot of major offensives. There's lots of artillery barrages, and there's lots of airstrikes. There's going to be some massive airstrikes coming this week, according to Ukrainian intelligence. So they're preparing their population for that. And the temperature there has been dipping into the single-digit minus side. That's Celsius for all you metric people out there, all you evolved metric people. I'm just kidding. I'm just bugging you Americans. You know, I would take the imperial system if it meant that we could have our guns back. Put it that way. That would be a fair compromise. Anyways, there were satellite images coming out last week of Ukraine from space, and it was just totally black. And they're expecting more attacks on critical and energy infrastructure next week. So I can only imagine that the problem is going to get worse. So we have an estimated 540,000 Russian troops stationed on the outskirts of Ukraine with 1,000 rocket systems, 1,500 tanks, and a variety of other heavy equipment that they're preparing to use for a major winter offensive. And based on some of the rhetoric that's been thrown out, it's looking like they're going to try to take as much of the country as they can. At least that's the most I can ascertain. Now, there's been these rumors of the Russians using old nuclear ballast missiles without any sort of live ordnance in them. Apparently, it's been induced that they have been using these as decoys. Okay, so they're using old missiles that used to house nuclear warheads. They're taking out the nuclear warheads and they're just shooting the missile with no actual round in it. Okay, it just have a kinetic effect. It might hit a target, and the most effect it's going to have is that it hits the target using its kinetic energy. It's not going to actually have an explosion. So there was some concern that they're running out of missiles, and that, you know, this is an indication that they're on their last legs. But a lot of people are saying, well, it makes sense that if you're not going to be using some of these old, nuclear missile delivery systems, why not use them as decoys so that you can force the Ukrainians to turn on their radar and identify where they're located, so you can target their air defense systems with actual missiles. At least that's what they're saying. Okay, so that's what it appears like. I guess we're going to know in the next couple months exactly where Russia stands. And I think if this winter offensive doesn't go as Russia plans, that's when we seriously have to worry about the prospect of nuclear escalation, because that will mean that they've exhausted their general winter wild card and this major mobilization. That's when, of course, Crimea comes under threat. And if Crimea comes under threat, that the Russians have laid claim to for the last couple hundred years anyways, then that's when it's immediately going to go nuclear, if only in a limited tactical nuclear sense. We have Satan Sarmat missiles going into serial production. One of these missiles can carry up to 50 megatons, I do believe, with up to 50 different warheads, 40 of which I'm assuming would be like decoys, and then 10 would be active missiles, which could effectively, just destroy many, many cities at once if they so chose. But why is Russia, who's currently in a war mobilization mode, devoting 1/3 of its economy, yes, 1/3 of its economy, to military, to this war, spending all this money making these Sarmat missiles? I don't know. Something to think about anyways. It's worth repeating that NATO and the European Parliament have declared Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. I believe the votes were 494 to 58 against, and this will materialize into more support for the conflict in some way, shape, or form. Russia, under its current regime, is considered now terrorist and has violated its agreements with the alliance, and therefore the provision of limiting the front line of troops is null and void, according to the European Parliament, meaning that they're setting the groundwork for sending more supports, more military equipment. Patriot missiles right now currently being debated whether Poland wants them in Poland or in Ukraine. Jens Stoltenberg appears to be in support of sending these Patriot missile defense systems to Ukraine or to whoever wants them. So I think once this winter offensive starts, they're going to become far more lax in terms of what they're willing to allow fall into the hands of Ukrainians. And I don't think that the attitude towards the conflict is going to change in Washington, even though the Republicans now control, they control the House. There's just going to be bigger emphasis on accountability as to where these weapons are going, but they're going to keep sending because, they're still under this belief, and I suppose rightly so, that if they lose this conflict, then it's the beginning of the end of the U.S. empire and the NATO hegemony, if you will. The Ukrainian nuclear boss has made claims that Russia will leave the nuclear power plant, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, but he doesn't provide any evidence as to why. He's just saying that there's evidence that Russia might leave this nuclear power plant. Now, Russia has made some abrupt retreats or withdrawals, as the Russia bros like to call them, that I did not expect. So I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, anything is possible at this point, but it appears unlikely because it's strategic. It's on their side of the river, which means it would be like a beachhead for, the Ukrainians to effectively start to push down into Crimea. So I can't see it happening. And it also give them that nuclear shield that they could then use. And then when the Russians weren't in control of the power plant anymore, when you see news reports of the nuclear power plant being shelled, well, there would be no confusion about who was doing it at that point. Even though we know that the Russians currently are the ones who are stationed there, I've made the devil's advocate argument for the Ukrainians that if the Russians are using it as a shield and shooting from there, that the Ukrainians have no choice but to surgically target in and around the nuclear power plant. A lot of people say, well, why would they, the Ukrainians are trying to create a disaster. But, I'm trying to be the devil's advocate here, guys, and say, well, if they're being shot from there, they got to do something, right? So what do? I don't know. Create some sort of pact with the UN, the International Atomic Energy Agency, to control this region and create a safe zone around this region, but neither side trusts each other to honor such an agreement. So it's likely that that's not going to happen. We have Russia, who says they absolutely will embargo any country that enforces the upcoming oil price cap. That means that we're likely going to see, maybe not in the short term, not right after the price cap goes into effect, but I would say come next year, the price of gasoline and oil and diesel is going to go even higher as a result of this global decoupling that we're going to start to see as a result of this oil price cap embargo. And that could just be, the first of many more sanctions-related packages that are levied on Russia moving forward. We already have gas prices rising in Europe. Senators are pressing Washington to give drones to Ukraine. They're these MQ-1C drones. I'm not sure if how similar they are to the Raptor-style drones. They kind of look like them. They're worried that they could be hacked and fall into Russian hands, so they're considering sending them, but downgraded versions that don't give away all the secrets, I guess. There is also a sign that I just read a story. Up until now, China hasn't directly been providing Russia with any sort of support, at least not that we know of, in terms of weapons and manpower. However, there is some evidence that there have been flights of these AN-124 cargo planes going from Russia and China and back frequently, with high frequency, like 10 times a week, turning off their transponders periodically. It appears as though they're potentially sending some types of equipment to the Russians, probably infantry level stuff, like helmets, body armor, things of that nature. So I think that's the first acknowledged, or not acknowledged, but the first obvious indication of Chinese support for materiel to the Russian military fight. The Belarusian pro-Western foreign minister has died, and I say pro-Western in a relative sense. He was not really pro-Western, but was at one time more pro-Western. But he's died. So that perhaps was just one less roadblock towards Belarus participating in the conflict. Belarus is currently reinforcing their border with Ukraine in what some people anticipate is going to be some sort of northern offensive maneuver, either cutting off Kiev from the west, because ultimately, in order for Russia to win the conflict, they're going to have to sever the supply route from the west. All that stuff is coming in from Poland, which is being routed through Poland, and they're going to have to cut that off. That's why they're concerned about putting these Patriot missiles there, because they know the shizzy's about to hit the fizzy, okay? But don't be surprised if in the next week or two you don't really hear a lot about major movements of Russian forces. You are still going to see some major airstrikes in the coming week ahead, which could potentially cripple and be the straw that breaks the camel's back for a lot of Ukrainians wanting to evacuate the country and possibly evacuate some of the bigger cities. What else do we got? Let's end on this note, guys. You guys seen this? The sheep walking around in a circle? Now, I seen this 2 weeks ago, and I was like, okay, that's probably just some BS, probably just some camera tricks. But apparently it's a real thing. And look how perfect that circle is. These sheep have been walking around in this circle for weeks in China somewhere. Apparently this isn't the first time this phenomenon has been observed. But to see such a perfect circle like that, people are talking about aliens, magnetic fields, God only knows what. Some of the more level-headed, or at least attempts, which I think fail miserably, attempts at explaining this are claustrophobia. One researcher says that the sheep are suffering from claustrophobia, and because they're a herd animal that needs to run, that they're doing this circle thing, but it doesn't explain why no sheep are in the center of the circle. And the other explanation is listeriosis, which is like a turning disease or something, where I don't know if it's neurological or what, but it creates some kind of disorientation and the animal just goes around and round and round. Apparently, though, these sheep are healthy, and that is a perfect circle. And, I'm not one to frequent a Jason A video, but every other year or so, he comes out with one, if it's a he or she, or I don't know who runs that channel. They come out with one with the strange sounds around the world. You guys ever watch those? And yeah, there's some weird stuff. It makes me wonder if they are drilling deep underground military bases, and that's what's causing these sounds. I would not be surprised in light of everything that's going on. I'm not saying that is happening. I'm just saying, I figured I'd save the best for last 2 minutes. So it's only the hardcores, the people who really love the channel, who are still sticking around, who I know are not going to abandon me for making such crazy educated or perhaps uneducated guesses about what's going on. But these strange sounds around the world, I don't know. I have noticed a lot more reports of meteors and asteroid activity, and I'm not sure if that's because of the meteor shower that was happening just in the past week. Anyways, maybe it's nothing. There's a good chance it's probably nothing. We got enough to worry about than having to worry about sheep going around in circles, but that's weird. That is very, very weird. That's all I'll say about that. Let's hope that some rational explanation can be provided to us to just keep us quiet about it. It's like that Norway spiral. They never did figure out. Remember that Norwegian spiral? They said it was a missile, a Russian missile that was spinning around, and one of its rockets or something misfired. And yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of weird stuff going on, isn't it? You guys let me know what you think in the comments section below. And yeah, go check out Black Friday. Almost up this Sunday. We extended it until midnight. Get 13% off everything at CanadianPreparedness.com. If you want to get something, get it now. All right. Take care, guys. Canadian Prepper out.